Welcome to the Red Pill Sports and Entertainment Show. I am your host, Albert Apache, and as usual, we are brought to you by Open Source Self-Defense, Fitness and Grappling, Purposeful Fitness. So, we're going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys win over the Eagles and what that means to the NFC East and the NFC, as well as take a look at what the playoff picture is starting to look like in the NFL. We're going to talk about the results at UFC 231, the major win by Max Holloway over Brian Ortega. Very one-sided, lopsided victory for him. We're going to talk a little bit about Heisman Trophy winner Kyler Murray and whether or not he actually was the deserving player, and then also some of the ridiculousness that some media type decided to bring out. But first, I recently did a video on and a breakdown on the different parts of the Gracie Combatives suite of at-home learning systems. I had done a critique of the Women Empowered, and in that critique, I talked about how I felt like they were still selling the scary narrative, the scary stranger narrative too much, and that I talked about how, mostly women know their attacker and that's how they should approach it. And lo and behold, just this past week, Gracie Breakdown Channel did a 6 bedroom techniques every woman should know. And they talked about how the bedroom is actually the most dangerous place for a woman when it's concerning sexual assault, her own bedroom. So I'm really happy that they took this on and that they're approaching it from this perspective. I'm not going to be as haughty to say that they must have watched my breakdown, but it does make me feel good that I was a little bit ahead of the curve and that, I put something out, talking about I wish they would address this particular topic or address the women's self-defense more from this prerogative. Now, these techniques are very good techniques. They're doing a free, I had talked about it before in that video, they are going to be doing a set of free seminars, and then they'll probably, sell their, Women Empowered DVD set or online curriculum if you want to purchase that. So if you're a female, I think that it's a really good course. If you're not a female, unfortunately, I believe that these classes are open to females only. I feel like they should be open to anybody, but I understand why you wouldn't want men in that class, especially given that you may have women in there that have experienced a sexual assault and they may not feel comfortable with a male training partner or with, male training partners close within their proximity. So I understand that. That being said, I feel like the techniques that they present in the video are techniques that everybody should know. Again, it still comes back to the same issue though, as with any home learning system when it comes to self-defense or martial arts. There's no real replicating having a live person to drill with, to train with, to feel the real live resistance. If you go into these seminars and you get this information, to me, it would behoove you, ladies, to continue your grappling training. Even if it's not at a Gracie CTC, find another grappling school, whether it be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Judo or Sambo or, some type of MMA grappling school. These, to me, are truly techniques that can be utilized by a smaller, less athletic, not as strong person, such as a female against a male. There is a trigger warning before you watch that video. If you go and you look it up and you check it out, there is a trigger warning, so be aware of that. So anyhow, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the Kyler Murray Heisman Trophy winner. So first and foremost, let me say that I believe that, the Heisman committee got it right. what he's been able to do is, pretty spectacular. I did feel like, it could have gone a couple different ways, but I think they chose the right guy, the right kid. Very deserving. The word is now that he is not going to enter the NFL, that he's going to play baseball. However, now that he's won the Heisman Trophy, one could speculate that this may give him the launch pad or the confidence or however you want to put it, to raise his stock in the draft and to consider going into the NFL draft. Of course, as usual, the vultures in the prototypical media, cannot allow a young black male to have any kind of success without having to pick him apart and make him choose a side. So basically, they go after this kid. He's still a kid now, really. By all accounts, he's still a kid. I mean, he's still in college. Let's just be real about it. And, they want to go after this kid because of some supposed gay slurs that he used on Twitter when he was like 13, 14, maybe 15 years old. I just find it deplorable that this is what we're going to do. This is what media types, that these supposed journalists that are so above the fray, this is what they think passes as doing a job, is basically, drudging up things that you did as a kid and then trying to hold you accountable 5 years later. It's just ridiculous. And this is the tone. This is what creates the tone deafness. So, those of you who are anti-Trump, right? I'm not anti-Trump. I'm not for Trump. I'm not pro-Trump or anti-Trump. Okay. I don't really care for the guy, but he doesn't make me want to go crazy either. But those of you who are truly anti-Trump, especially if you happen to be a media type that's listening to my show so that you can, cherry pick my awesome takes, you do realize that it's this kind of thing that creates the tone deafness by the middle Americas, right? Because pretty much you think that what you're reporting is some kind of newsworthy thing, that something that should be outrageous for everybody because you live on the coasts and you're in this echo chamber. But really, that's what causes the tone deafness. In all reality, you're doing more harm than good for the LGBT community, because the reality is that this is what makes people callous, because they're like, oh my gosh, everybody got called names, everybody said something stupid when they were a kid, let's get over it, right? Let's give him a pass. Has he beat up any gay people? No. Has he beat up any transsexual people? No. What about, cross-dressers or transgendered or whatever their term, it doesn't matter. Whatever term you want to insert there. Has he done anything that is violent that way or that is unacceptable? If the answer is no, then seriously, we need to get off of his back, because it's not right. It's not right, okay? We're not talking about him committing a crime. He didn't commit a crime and is running from the crime. Now, it would be a completely different story had they drudged up something to the effect of, he had committed a, aggravated assault against a, gay, classmate in high school, specifically because he was gay. Now, that would be a worthwhile story, okay? But when you were 13, 14, 15 years old and you used terms like, oh, that's so gay, or oh my gosh, what a fag, or oh my gosh, you're a homo, right? You were just a dumb kid. You didn't understand what you were saying, right? You were so dumb you didn't even know that what homo meant all by itself. What did you mean by homo? Homo sapien? Right? Like, you thought that was some kind of thing to say because you were a young, stupid kid. You had no idea. You had no idea what you were saying, right? And I mean, it just gets to this point where it's like, to what degree are we going to hold people accountable for what they said as children? Okay, as children. Now, I just think that this gets outrageous. Again, it's always seems to be attacking, a male. It's always seeming to be attacking, somebody who doesn't have the same political agenda that the, reporter has. And this is what causes the whole concept of fake news, just so you understand. This isn't news. Nobody who watches college football cares. And those that do actually care, the people who do care that this happened, they don't watch college football. So it's almost like all you're doing is trying to make the divide bigger between, those that watch sports and those that do not, so that it's just one more thing to divide the country on. Because this is really not a story. I mean, the real story is what a schmuck this reporter is. I want somebody to dig into his past and find out all the little dirty, nasty things that he did or that he said while he was growing up. Because you know what? I grew up close to the gay community, very, very close. And let me say, they don't always have the nicest thing to say about straight people or heterosexual people. They think it's okay to call heterosexuals breeders, like we're animals, right? They didn't always have the nicest things to say. So don't sit here and tell me that they're pure as the wind-driven snow, okay? I went to school with a couple of guys, a couple of gals who were gay. And I didn't have a problem with them. But that doesn't mean they didn't use bad language or horrible language when referencing other people. It's just this ridiculousness that somehow straight males are the devil, but what everybody else says is completely okay. It completely, you can dismiss it and it's acceptable. But let a straight male say something and oh my gosh, we have to, it could have been when he was 2 years old, he could have accidentally said cross-dresser, not even knowing what he's saying, and oh well, we got to hold him accountable. He must have been raised in a horrible household where that was frowned upon, and we need to put him in counseling. Can we just back away from it? I mean, seriously, reporter guy, stay in your lane, right? This isn't a story. You're the story now. You made yourself the story, and maybe that's what the story needs to be. Story needs to be that everybody ignores this guy, right? Just ignore him. Stop buying the paper that he reports in, because this is fluff. This is not real news. This is where, like I said, this is the whole title of fake news. This isn't actual news. There's so many other things going on that really matter. Okay? We have some young girl going into the Senate who ran and won, right? The Cortez girl. And while I keep trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, it seems like more and more that I hear about her, and the more and more she opens her mouth, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, how ignorant is it? How did this girl get elected? I don't understand how she got elected if she really is as ignorant as it seems like. It just doesn't, it's beyond the pale. But there's no story on that. Clear that up for me. How about you clear that story up for me, right? Now I need to know about her past. I need to know about what she was doing 5 years ago. I need to know where she got her college degree and what her grades were. Like, there's things I need to know about her. She's talking about wanting to run for president, but your story is some Heisman Trophy winner when he was 14 or 15 used a couple of gay slurs. That's your big story. That's your in-depth story. When nobody cares. It's just outrageous. I can't help it. I feel really bad for this kid. It should have been a day where he was he got to celebrate, and he got to be proud of an accomplishment. He entered into a very small group of very elite football players, college football players, and I really feel like they should have given him the day. It's a little ridiculous. But anyhow, let's move on. So that brings us to UFC 231. Basically, Max Holloway retains his title after a devastating defeat of Brian Ortega. This was a pretty one-sided fight, and probably by the scorecards, you would think that Brian was never in the fight, but that would be wrong. Brian was definitely in the fight in the first and second rounds. Third round, I think he won. And then in the fourth round, he just got battered. Hats off to Max Holloway. I really was questioning whether or not he was going to have the stamina going into the fourth round. And the reason why I thought that was that, he's had a hard time making weight in the past. Also, he generally starts slow and picks up the pace. It's one thing to do that for, pick up the pace in round 2 and round 3 when the fight's over, but then to pick up the pace in round 4 generally is a really tough thing to do. So that was, pretty impressive win. What does this mean now for the division? Well, for Brian, I think this is a pretty big setback. A lot of things got exposed here for Brian. The first of which, a lot of people are pointing to his defensive posturing, his ability to not get hit. Let's keep in mind that Max is an outstanding striker, and that he beat up Aldo, right? He struck with Conor McGregor. So Max is a exceptional striker. So I don't think we can point to Brian getting beat up, getting tagged, getting picked apart by an exceptional striker and then say, well, his striking defense is not good enough, right? I think his striking defense looked pretty good most of the night. He does have to add some variety to what he does to stay safe. Namely, he needs to work in getting up his guard a little bit higher, using those elbows to block rather than always trying to roll with the punch or to pull on the punches. That was the very first thing, right? Is that he got picked apart, but but his defense was pretty good. I mean, it was still there. The biggest part of his striking that really let him down was he had some kind of weird little hitch or weird pause. He would enter into the pocket, not and really close a distance, almost get into a clinching distance where if he would have reached out, he could have grabbed a hold of Max. Yet he didn't do anything. Sometimes he would get in there, and Max, of course, evading, would get out of the way, and now they were almost touching. He could have reached out and grabbed a hold of Max, but rather than doing, he did absolutely nothing in that position. He didn't exit properly. He kind of just paused there, and every time he paused in that short range, almost a dirty boxing range, except there was no actual physical contact or no clench happening, Max would just unload on him, and Brian would just kind of pause there every single time. He would get Brian to overcommit on his entry. Brian would be in an awkward position, but rather than getting his hands up, rather than looking to tie Max up, rather than do something to exit properly, it was almost confusing to him, almost like maybe he's boxing too much. The muscle memory telling him, okay, if I overstep here, this is what you do in a boxing ring, right? And doing those things. But, of course, Max is going to capitalize on that because it's not boxing. It's in the octagon. The gloves are smaller. The windows, the openings, don't have to be as big, right? The gloves are not going to cover up your face or your head as much as, boxing gloves are. And, Max would just pick him apart. So that's where the striking defense I felt needed improvement. The other thing, the real glaring problem was his MMA wrestling. He got in on Max a few times. He sucked up a leg quite a few times. He just could not finish takedowns. And I know Max has a great, takedown defense. I understand that. But when you're able to close on somebody's hips to that extent and you're able to get them up against the cage, you have to get them down. You have to finish the takedown. And even if he wouldn't have finished every time, he should have been finishing at least half the time, right? Half the time. If he'd have finished half the time, this would have been a much different fight. Also, his shots were strictly shots. The couple of times that he shot from kind of a boxing range, kind of came underneath Max's strikes, and he shot in, they were just straight shots. Like, he wasn't mixing his wrestling shots into his striking or vice versa. And so I guess you could actually say more so than even the MMA wrestling not being good, it's almost like the blending of his MMA skills was not as crisp as we maybe all thought it was going to be, or it should be, or that we believed it was. He gets into very specific modes. He has his boxing mode and his kicking mode, and then he has his grappling mode and his jiu-jitsu mode, and they don't blend very well. I feel like there was times, because if he was going to take the fight to the ground, which it seemed like that was part of the game plan, from what he initiated in the first round and from hearing what Henner had to say in the corner, it seemed as though getting Max to the ground was part of the game plan. That being said, he didn't really blend his takedowns. He didn't try to mix in his takedowns to his strikes to his takedowns to set other things up down the road. I feel like he would have had a much easier time taking down Max had he basically shown Max, hey, look, every time I shoot, I'm not always shooting. Every time I change levels, I'm not always shooting. Sometimes I'm going to change levels and come up with an overhand, or I'm going to change levels and come up with, some kind of teep kick, or, I might shoot, but as I shoot, I'm transitioning into a different position, right? Transitioning to try to come around to your back, or, a duck under, like not the same things over and over and over again. And it seemed as though Brian had maybe 2 takedowns that he was trying to hit, and that was about it. Maybe 3, I guess. You could call a double leg and a single leg separate takedowns, but for most part, they're pretty straightforward. I kind of almost consider them one takedown because of the way they flow together. And then he had that little outside leg trip he kept trying to hit against the cage. But other than that, it didn't seem like he had other takedowns to go to, which was kind of disappointing. I think that Brian probably is going to drop down to probably 5 to 7 in the rankings. He's going to have to beat some guys to get back up there. You might probably see a rematch with some of the guys that, felt like, hey, I think I could beat him on a second time around, or, he caught me with a submission at the end, or he caught me with some kind of flash thing, but I was winning the fight. So I think some of those guys might be fishing for a rematch, and I'm pretty sure the UFC will give it to him. I really feel like Brian really needs to work on blending his technique. I know that he does his boxing where he does his boxing, and I know he brought in Freddie Roach for a while. I don't know if that's still an ongoing thing. I know that Henner is obviously his jiu-jitsu coach, but maybe it's time to look outside the basic camp and look to an MMA style coach that isn't just going to say, okay, look, here's your boxing, this is great. Oh, look, here's your jiu-jitsu, this is great. But starts helping him to understand how to put it together now. How do you flow these skills together? Because to me, that is what looked like was the biggest problem for Ortega against Max. Shevchenko won. She beat Joanna. She pretty much manhandled Joanna. I really don't see Joanna staying up in this weight class. Her quickness is okay, but it's not what it was in her lower weight class. And her striking power was not that much more significant. She was a little bit stronger in fighting off some of the takedowns, but I don't know that, she wants to stay here. She'll be playing second fiddle, if not third fiddle or fourth fiddle to, Valentina and some of the other fighters that are bigger in this weight class. I don't know that she wants to stay here. I don't think it's good for her career. I don't think it's really good for her. The other thing was, I found it funny that her strength coach was talking about putting muscle on her so she could have that one strike knockout power. And I wonder sometimes if, some of these times when I hear stuff like this from some of these individual coaches, I wonder, is the MMA coach, is the striking coach talking to the strength coach? Because pretty much everybody's in pretty much agreement, and Firas Zahabi did a video on this not that long ago about that, death touch, that one punch. Like if you have that killer punch, that punch that can put anybody to sleep, you either have it or you don't have that power. Like, he talked about how, an MMA coach, a striking coach, can teach you how to hit harder, but they can't really teach you how to hit hard, right? Kind of like how a track coach can make you faster, but they can't make you fast. Like, I don't know if people understand what they mean, but basically, if you don't have it, it's kind of the belief that if you're not born with, this gift of, let's say, for instance, speed, right? If you're without much training, you're running a 5 flat 40, okay? There's probably a good chance that a track coach with giving you the right technique can get you to, a 4.5, maybe even a 4.4, right? They could probably do that for you. But if you're running, a 6, right, or a 5.5 or a 7, they're never going to get you into the 4 somethings. You're just never going to be that fast, right? I mean, they can make you faster. They'll shave off a couple tenths of a second, maybe even as much as a second if you're up in the 7s and 6s, right? But once you start getting down into, the 5s and below, if that's where you're at naturally without any coaching, just how you run, that means you are fast, and the track coach can make you faster. And very similarly with striking, if you can hit hard, in other words, if she was one punch knockouting, if she had that one punch knockout power at 115, there's a good chance that when she puts the weight on, you can translate that one punch knockout power to 125, okay? But if she never had that knockout power at 115, there's a good chance she's not going to have it at 125. And part of the reason why is that you are going to take away some of the quickness. You are going to take away a little bit of the acceleration. You are going to also be punching a bigger, hardier opponent. So if you had a hard time knocking out a small 115-pound opponent, right? Now you make the opponent bigger, the chances are you're not knocking out that opponent. That's like saying if you can't knock out a grown man, right? If you can't walk up to a grown man, one punch, knock him out, okay? There's a pretty slim chance that no matter how strong you get, you're not going to be knocking out a gorilla, right, with a single punch. It's just not going to happen. So it's one of those things. And it just seemed really weird to me. and it almost, you saw that kind of played into the fight. Joanna had a really hard time closing the distance. She had a really hard time getting in there without getting picked up on the way in. She did land a couple of strikes, and it just didn't faze Valentina. It just didn't. And when Valentina got a hold of her, she was manhandling her to the point where, the things that, Joanna has done in the past in the clinch to escape, i.e., going to her Muay Thai clinch and knees and elbows and pushing off and framing away and, getting some dirty boxing in. That's what she was doing when people tried to clinch with her at 115. Here with Valentina, she wasn't able to do those things. She had to use all of her additional added strength to basically fight off the clinch. So I really don't know that I want to see Joanna at 125 anymore. I really didn't feel like it was that fun to fight for her, like to watch her show her skills. So I really feel like she probably should go back down to 115. I don't know how hard that weight cut's going to be now that she put on some more muscle, but I guess we'll see. All right, let's move on. And that brings us to my beloved Dallas Cowboys, beating the Eagles 29-23 in an overtime game on Sunday. Here's the thing, guys. I'm really happy that the Cowboys won, but this also is problematic if you're a true Dallas Cowboy fan and you want the team to do well, not just today, but into the future. And the reason why is that they won even with Dak having a horrible game. Okay, Dak Prescott had a horrible game yesterday, and yet he still pulled a couple of passes out his rear end when they needed them. That's not to mention the, passes he completely missed. I mean, I think he missed Gallup at least twice. I think he missed Hearns once on plays that they were open. Okay, and that's not good. That is not good. Dak is a serviceable quarterback, but the reality is that at this point, he is the limiting factor of the Dallas Cowboys. There was a point in time where the Cowboys were winning this game. I want to say they were winning 9-0, and the Eagles scored, I want to say it was 9 points all total off of basically Dak Prescott turnovers. This should not have been a game. This game should have been over by the end of the third quarter. Not only should the Cowboys have been up on points and those 9 points not been on the board, but also they should have had more points because of the simple fact that, Dak just missed wide open guys running free down the sideline. And you can't have that consistently and win games long term. You can't keep missing guys deep. And, everybody tried to give him a pass. All these Cowboy fans try to give Dak a pass, even though, it shouldn't be that way, because how can you regress, right? You're supposed to be getting better, but your numbers are getting worse and worse every year. Okay. Here's the thing. Dak, is missing guys wide open, and you can't win like that long term. Okay, you cannot. You can't keep asking your defense, to cover up the fact that you're turning the ball over. If you include his fumbles and his INTs, I want to say Dak is only like +2 in the turnover ratio, TDs to turnovers. That's not good. He has over double-digit turnovers and only 2 more TDs. That is not okay. And it's not right for him to continue to ask the defense to basically, undo the damage that he does week in and week out. when he has those turnovers, it breaks so much rhythm and so much momentum for the offense. And this offense in particular needs that momentum. It needs that rhythm. This is a very, as much as people do not like to give Jason Garrett and the offensive coordinators for the Dallas Cowboys any kind of credit, the reality is that this is a brilliantly schemed offense with a very limited quarterback. When everybody in the building knows that the ball's going to one of two guys, it's either going to Ezekiel Elliott, or somehow Dak is going to try and throw it to Amari Cooper, right? That's pretty much the two options, okay, at this point. Somehow, and everybody knows that Dak is limited as a quarterback. Everybody sees that he is limited in his touch, in his accuracy down the field. You know that he's going to most likely throw the ball somewhere between 5 to 15 yards and hope that one of his receivers can get a few yards after the catch. Okay, this is all known, and yet the offense and the head coach can still put together a game plan that is offensively productive, that gains yards, that keeps the ball and keeps the ball long enough to keep that amazing defense fresh. That is scheme. That isn't the raw talent. Okay, Dak is not Aaron Rodgers. Okay, he's not Tom Brady. Okay, he's not even a Matthew Stafford. Okay, he's not out there manufacturing plays with fleet foot nimbleness, sliding around in the pocket and finding guys open. Okay, they're manufacturing these plays for him, and that would be okay if he wasn't turning the ball over. Long term, they cannot continue to win like that. I want to say I looked up their turnover differential and it's 0. That means they are even. With that amazing defense, with the way that defense plays, they should easily have a +5, +7 turnover ratio. And they probably would if Dak wasn't fumbling the ball. And my bigger concern is that he's fumbling the ball. The INTs, I can kind of live with, right? I can kind of live with the INTs. To me, the bigger problem is the fumbling of the football. You can't hold on to the ball and take sacks and fumble the ball, okay? It's inexcusable. And it means, it's just not a way that the Cowboys can win long term. Now, the reason why this is a bad thing for the Cowboys is, unfortunately, I think this means that Jerry Jones is going to look to extend Dak Prescott. And that might be okay if Dak is willing to take somewhere in the neighborhood between, I would say, 12 and 17. But I think Dak's going to be trying to ask for 25. And the reality is that Jerry Jones, if he sticks to his guns, is going to get Dak at a discounted rate. Because there's nobody in the league right now that's looking at Dak and going, oh my gosh, he's going to be on the free market? We need to sign that guy. Okay, nobody's looking at him that way. Okay, it just is what it is. So Jerry Jones really needs to be smart here, stick to his guns, and tell Dak, hey, look, the reality is you need Amari Cooper, you need Zeke, and you need this offensive line to win football games. That's what you need. Those are the tools you need. I can't keep these tools around you if I pay you 25. That's just basic mathematics. You also need DeMarcus Lawrence on the other side, right? You also need me to re-sign this young, hungry, defense. You need me to re-sign Van Der Esch, right? You need me to re-sign these guys coming up in the future. So, you need that defense. You can't win without that defense. They're covering up those fumbles you're giving away. So, if Jerry Jones is smart, he'll stick to his guns and he will have the leverage, because the reality is Dak, nobody in the league is looking at Dak. No GM in the league is looking at Dak and thinking, well, we'll pay him 25, right? Nobody's thinking that. So, Jerry Jones just needs to stick to his guns. But it really worries me as a Cowboy fan. Which Jerry Jones are we getting? Is this the new Jerry Jones that has been very cerebral, has drafted very, very well, has made really good, smart moves? As a GM, again, I asked, when the Cowboys win this game against the Eagles, okay, they beat the Saints, they beat the Eagles, they're on a 5-game winning streak. When does the narrative on Jerry Jones being a horrible GM, not knowing what he's doing, being, the absent-minded professor, if you will, and, Jason Garrett's just a yes-man puppet, hand clapper, right? Clapper, that's what he is, a yes-man clapper, right? When was that narrative going to end? Because you can't look at the product on the field right now and tell me that that's not coaching and that's not general manager selection of personnel. That is some really good personnel, not just at the player level either. Look at the coaching moves that they've made over the last couple of years to match up with this young team, because this team is relatively young. Look what they've done. So I just don't, I'm kind of tired of the narrative that Garrett's just a clapper and he's just a yes man puppet. I mean, I'm sorry, you don't sit down with the offensive coordinator and produce a game plan to manufacture yards when you have a limited quarterback like you do and all you can do is clap when all you are is a puppet, okay? It just doesn't happen. I really feel that Jason Garrett is the most underrated, most unjustly maligned head coach in all of the NFL, because he's clearly better than that. Most people don't even realize that with the win yesterday, that basically has guaranteed Garrett that he still has only had one losing season in his entire tenure as the Dallas Cowboys head coach. That is ridiculous. That is amazing. It also guaranteed him that he will continue to have a better winning percentage than Bill Parcells. But yet there's this notion that Bill Parcells was this guru and that somehow he put the Cowboys on this winning track. But the reality is that Bill Parcells had a losing season in his short stint as Cowboy coach. The reality is that Bill Parcells never won a playoff game as the Cowboys head coach. So I just think it's a lot of malarkey. It's just the thing that the Cowboys are held to a different standard than every other team. And it just gets ridiculously old, to be honest. The Cowboys and Cowboy fans even do it to themselves. They measure success by Super Bowls only. On that note, Cowboy fans, I hear a lot of people talk a lot of smack about Cowboy fans and how they just don't like them. Stephen A. Smith went on and on and on. He just doesn't like them. Where are they? Well, I have a question. 15 years ago, okay, when there was no Tom Brady at the Patriots, right? I didn't see a bunch of Patriots jerseys everywhere. Where did all these magical Patriots fans come from? Before Kurt Warner and the greatest show on turf, where were all these supposed Ram fans? And let's not forget the Aints. But yet, why is it that Cowboy fans are always singled out for being quote-unquote obnoxious and quote-unquote only coming out of the woodwork when the Cowboys win? I mean, can't we say the same thing for every other team? I mean, it kind of reminds me of like the Golden State Warriors right now, right? Who even knew that Golden State was an actual NBA team before the run that they got on with Steph Curry? Most people knew the Clippers more than they knew the Warriors as far as California NBA teams. So it it's just a little bit ridiculous, and I just wanted to take a moment to call out all the little wiener Cowboy fan haters that are just so ridiculous. They're just so doggone, two-faced. Everybody else can be a fair weather fan, but not Cowboy fans. Now, me, myself, I don't like fair weather Cowboy fans either. Mostly because they're ignorant most of the time, right? But that's the same with any football fan that's ignorant. I can't stand them. They don't know what they're talking about. They haven't even watched games. They don't even know players. They don't know anything. They don't even know basic rules, right? So they annoy me too. But that's not a Cowboy fan thing. That's an ignorant fan thing. But anyhow, I digress. Let's get into what's going on with the rest of the NFL. All right, guys. So let's get into it. Let's first talk about the teams that are in the hunt. You got the Dolphins, Colts, Titans, Broncos, Browns, and let's see, the Bengals in the AFC. So let's kind of look at those teams and see how realistic a shot they have. I think Miami probably doesn't have a realistic shot of getting in, just because most likely you're going to see either Baltimore or Pittsburgh start to win out and make it in. But then again, who really knows, because Houston also has a 9-4 lead, which is the same as New England. But Miami, I think, has probably a hard time getting in out of the AFC East. Next, you have the AFC North, and Pittsburgh, Baltimore are top of that one. But what's interesting there, right, is the Cleveland Browns are right behind them, right? They're not that far off. And Cleveland, I think, has a realistic shot because they control their own destiny. Of the other teams that are in the hunt, right, they play Baltimore, okay? They play the Broncos. So pretty much, and I think they also play, the last team they play is the Bengals. So pretty much every team that is in the hunt, or that the Browns play, is in the hunt. And if they could beat all of the teams that are in the hunt with them, there's probably a good shot that they're going to get into the playoffs. I mean, they still need a little bit of help from Pittsburgh. They have to drop a game here and there, but I mean, they do have a shot to get in. And even if they go, what would that be, 9-7? If they were to go 9-7, they got a shot to get in as a wild card as well. Then you go down the list, you see Indy is still in the hunt. Indy looks okay at 7-6. Maybe they're turning it on, but Tennessee is right behind them at 7-6 as well. So, and they're both trying to chase Houston. So that last playoff spot, I think, is going to come down to like a 9-6 record, something like that, or 9-7 record, 10-6, something like that. So they're really going to have to turn it on and pretty much win out. There's a lot of pressure on those two teams. And let's just face it, a lot is expected out of Indy and Andrew Luck. So there's a lot of pressure there. Kansas City, at 11-2, they got that win with Mahomes throwing no-look passes. That was crazy. The Chargers are en route, to win as well, to get into the playoffs at 10-3. Denver is the closest team in that division at 6-7. And I know technically they're in the playoff hunt, but I really don't see them being able to get into the playoffs. I don't know. They're going to have to catch so many teams. They need so much help to get into the playoffs that I just don't know that that's going to happen. I mean, I think the only team that they play, or the only team that's ahead of them that they play that is really going to, they could beat for a wild card at this point is Cleveland. Oakland isn't in it anymore, and they do play the Chargers at the end of the year, but by that time, I think we'll know whether or not they're in or not. Now, if we turn our attention over to the NFC, we got, in the hunt still, the Panthers, Eagles, Redskins, Packers, Buccaneers, Giants, Lions, and Falcons. Now, let's be real. Redskins on down probably are not making the playoffs. 6-7 for the Redskins, 5-7 for the Packers, 5-8 for the Bucks, 5-8 for the Giants, Lions 5-8, Falcons 4-9. I'm sorry, but I just don't see an 8-8 team. One 8-8 team may get into the playoffs, but not all of them. And most likely that 8-8 team is going to be a better team, right? And that means that most likely it'll probably be the Panthers or the Eagles that get that, that get into that wild card seat if they can win out. Because if you look at the wild card round as it stands, you have the Cowboys coming out of the NFC East, and they will be playing most likely, it looks like, the Seahawks at this point, right? And the Vikings will be playing the Bears. So you already have a wild card team there. I just don't know, you've got the Rams and the Saints in there. I just don't know that, you're going to catch the Seahawks. Like, the Eagles have a shot to catch the Cowboys, but wow, I mean, they really need help from the Cowboys. Like, the Cowboys have to have a horrible collapse. They have to not win another game for that to happen, and that would mean that they would be at 9-6, 9-7 for the year, right? So 9-7, and then the Eagles could go 9-7, but the Cowboys would still win the tiebreaker because they swept the Eagles. So I just don't know how they're going to win the NFC East and get in. As far as your wild cards, I don't know. The Seahawks look like a pretty strong wild card team at this point. I don't know that you're going to unseat them. They're 7-5. They have a pretty decent lead on the Panthers and the Eagles. The Vikings at 6-5. They're right in there, but they could possibly catch the Vikings, but I don't know. I just don't see it. I don't see the Vikings. Seems like the Vikings are playing decent. The Eagles the last couple weeks have not, right? Panthers have not. So I don't know that they're going to get in. I think pretty much what we see in the NFC playoff picture is what we're going to get. I really think we have more of a upset brewing over at the AFC, especially because those teams are starting to whittle down now, right? You're getting more and more whittled down to who's in the hunt in the AFC. In the NFC, not so much. Interesting though is you got a few teams, the Chiefs, the Saints, and the Rams. They've all clinched a playoff berth at least, and the Saints and the Rams have both clinched their division title. So they're really close to getting their bye. Interestingly enough, the Patriots and the Chiefs that lead the AFC, neither one of them has clinched their division yet, nor have they clinched a bye. So the AFC is a little bit more interesting, I think, right now with what's going on. I actually like the NFC a little bit more, of course, because I'm a big Cowboy fan. But, as far as coming down to the wire and what's going to happen in the playoffs, looks like the AFC is going to have a lot more fun looking games and runs and upsets and surprises in store. So that's what we got, guys. Just to let you guys know, coming into the holiday season, I'm busy just like everybody else, so I'm gonna take a break from doing the weekly show up until the new year is over. So I believe that'll be on the 5th. I will do a show, a full show. Until that time, I will be doing little tidbits and snippets for you guys on the day-to-day information, maybe about a 10 to 15 minute little blurb on whatever I thought was interesting for that day or for the last couple days, but not the long format show that we've been doing. So thanks for listening, guys. I appreciate it. Remember, be practical, be purposeful, get fit with a purpose.